Ferenc. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Uri. Thanks for welcoming me.
Thanks a lot for your time, for joining us on this show. As always, let's start with your personal journey, which at the moment you don't work directly in aviation, but your journey is very much linked to aviation. So when, how, and why did it start?
Excellent. Yes, actually, it's very interesting because I started my career with an international environmental organization called WWF, the Panda organization. Actually, they just turned 60 last week, so there was a celebration, and I started my career with them 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a nice celebration last week. And actually, Panda is an organization well known for protecting endangered species and fighting for equality and environmental justice. So actually, but in the same time, also a global organization. So I was working a lot during the European accession when Central and Eastern European countries joined to the European Union. And we worked on Natura 2000 site designations and a lot of awareness raising among farmers, what's going to happen with their land, with endangered species on it. So it was a very interesting time. And yes, it involved a lot of travel. So even conservation organization employees are traveling and often by air. So it is no question. But on the other hand, uh, even at that time, we were using a lot of video conferencing, for example. So actually the way of doing work right now from home and working with colleagues from all over Europe, right, I'm doing it. It was very similar 15 years ago. And we had a policy that time that I was based in Budapest and commuting between Vienna, Bucharest, Lviv in Ukraine, that whatever is accessible by an overnight train, we should take a train. So that was my, let's say, history that even, let's say, 15, 20 years ago, I had to choose whether take a train. Actually, night trains were nice. When you travel towards Ukraine, the track is different in Russia and Ukraine, so you
It's
have to
wider.
change the tracks under the sleeping cars. So it was really a journey. And let's say, based on this, it involved a lot of travel. And I've got a family with kids, and I decided I'm looking for something more stable position. And that was the time when Budapest Airport had an environmental position announced with EU emission trading skills and all sorts of sustainability skills. It was exactly 10 years ago. So I applied and I picked up this position. So this was my, let's say, entering to the airport as an environmentalist.
Very interesting. So originally, you're not really an aviation person. You're more, let's say, sustainability person.
Yes, and many of my former Panda colleagues asked, how come that you are turning to the other side of the table? But I was looking from a different perspective, because at the same time, the airport was always some kind of magical world, and a very good location to work on different fields, even actually nature conservation. So we had endangered suslik relocation projects, these small mammals, very, very rare animals, and only huge grasslands are suitable for them. Actually, the airport is like this. So I could even practice some nature conservation, let's say, projects, or I could, get some benefits of that. But on the same time, it is really a serious industry, very serious emissions. So that's the other side of the story, that if you have only one, position or working hours limit, then you want to make the most out of it.
Absolutely, and yeah, I'm just trying to understand what your colleagues then told you, that you are like going on the other side of the table. I would slightly argue with that. I mean, aviation is not the biggest polluter out there, definitely, and doing so much good for the economies, for the planet, for the mankind, and also now in the pandemic, of course, transporting the vaccines and PPEs and all that stuff. And obviously it was also a chance opportunity for you to make a difference also in this aviation world, where of course yeah, there are some emissions related to that, but of course there is still lots of work that can be done, and it's being done over the last years and decades. So maybe you can also now summarize or highlight what were the biggest projects, the highlights of the strategy at Budapest Airport in terms of going greener.
Yes, and I think it is very important to understand that, yes, if you look at the numbers, aviation has only 2-3% of global CO2 emissions, but still there is a public perception. And when I came to the airport, I learned how many people are concerned about noise, for example. And actually, what an airport operator can do mitigating noise is very limited compared to the one people assume and local residents think that an airport can do. And a very good example, in 2012, the 12-13, after the grounding of Malév, one of the flagship environmental projects of the airport still remained ground run-up enclosure to reduce ground noise during engine tests. And I think it is very important to see that when local residents were complaining about 5 to 6, 10 night flights between midnight and 5 in a 5 hours period, at the same time, a engine run-up took place 20-30 minutes continuously. And this is something the airport could do against with a noise insulation wall. And it is really something can be done. You cannot really limit night flights in a capital airport when you have no other international airports in 200 kilometers radius. So the ones you can do, you establish. And this was the noise insulation at the airport for engine run-ups. In the same time, the carbon management was started in 2010. Budapest Airport was among the first airports, and I believe one of the first from Eastern Europe, joining to the ACI's airport carbon accreditation program. And this is, as you know, this is a continuous learning. And actually, 4 years ago, Budapest Airport reached carbon neutral status. So all the latter steps we were taking in that journey. So I think this was also an important step.
Absolutely, and massive achievement, definitely. So if you can pick up some of the projects which led to getting this to getting also this award or this status for Budapest Airport becoming carbon neutral, I think, which is fantastic for every airport, and also for especially for this not really the smallest airport with pre-COVID, I think 16-17 million passengers per annum. It's quite large, definitely here in Europe. So also potentially some inspiration for all the other airport managers who are listening to this podcast. Maybe some inspiration for them, what an airport can
Actually,
do.
it's correct that you say not only the accreditation was reached, but even an award was granted or given to Budapest Airport last year at the ACI Eco Innovation Award that you meant, which is correct. I think one of the main achievement is the Green Airport program, which is in one hand a task when an airport wants to reach from level 2 to level 3 optimization in the scheme, you need to show engagement with your stakeholders. And we translated it at Budapest Airport as a collaborative, let's say, awareness raising and a communication platform. We called it a Green Airport. We built a brand around it. We announced annual awards, which were linked to the airport annual award gala. So this was something, a prestige for the colleagues being there. But you also have to understand that many of the airport partners, ground handling companies, or let's say airline ticket office managers, or any other service providers at the airport, taxi companies, for example, they might not have the environmental expertise or carbon management expertise in-house as the airport has. So we were doing trainings about legislation changes. When, for example, electric mobility became more and more interesting for companies, and the Hungarian government had incentives, we invited experts to these meetings, and we shared this knowledge. Same with single-use plastics, for example, when it was already on the horizon that some legislation change will come, we invited the relevant personnel from the ministry and let her explain what are the plans on this. So it was, and it is still a knowledge sharing platform. And I think the partners appreciated that. And I think this is a good lesson if other airports would like to build up a stakeholder engagement program to use Green Airport at Budapest as an example.
Absolutely, it's an ongoing project, and which does never really ends. It's a journey, and yeah, basically every step is important. And as you are saying, involving the stakeholders and the wider community, it's absolutely crucial for the successful development also in this area. So you're no longer working directly in aviation, but let's still stay in this topic for a while. There is a massive debate. Many initiatives are already going on, like, for example, Airlines for Europe and ACI and other partners. They have this initiative Net Zero 2050, which is about achieving carbon neutrality for European aviation by 2050. What are your thoughts on that from your perspective? Is it real? First of all, is it realistic to achieve this carbon neutrality within 29 years? Is it ambitious enough? Should we target for more? Should we aim for 2040 or 2035? Or what's your take on that?
In my view, when I'm talking about airports as the infrastructure itself, I think carbon neutrality is even possible earlier. For the aviation as an industry, especially long-haul flights and especially long-haul flights, I think that's very ambitious, and I would be very careful claiming that I don't know, flights over 2 hours will be realistic at our present knowledge. But going back to the airports and the infrastructures, often I'm still working with infrastructure operators companies aiming for net zero. And I often say that it is something like if you look at your personal budget, right? And you take a debt, a mortgage, for example, and you say, I'm going to pay it back 20 years from now. And if you go to the bank and say, yes, don't worry, I just use the apartment, and in 20 years' time, you will get the money back, would the bank accept your argumentations? I'm not sure. Maybe the bank would ask every 6 months or every year some kind of prepayment, right? I see the same with net zero. So if you announce that I'm going to pay my mortgage in 2040, show me how you are planning to do it next year and the year after the next year, or at half time, and what is going to happen if these numbers are, not adding up. I think this is what the science-based targets initiative is all about. And actually the airport carbon accreditation scheme is also, when you are looking at the levels beyond level 4, asking airport operators to show actual steps. And this is how actually my career started taking off from the airports, when we were looking at how to make net zero electricity for the airport. This is the largest scope 2 emissions in Budapest, the electricity. And we were looking at local power production, practically solar power. And this is exactly something you cannot do year by year. So going back to the mortgage example, it's not something every month you will install 100 more solar panels. You make a decision that, okay, my scope 2 emissions requires X gigawatt hour of electricity production capacity, and I install in 2 goes, let's say 2 years time, and I will take let's say 20% of my carbon emissions. So this is something I believe all airports operators can, how to reduce their electricity emissions, their heating emissions, and their fuel consumption. If you have a good road, these 3, I think your net zero plan is more or less there.
Yeah, I love the mortgage analogy. Explains it really well. Yeah, and you highlighted a very important and interesting point that for the airport community, they should have also ambitious goals, and it's a little bit easier to reach the carbon neutrality also for them than for the airlines, where obviously the technology is just not there yet. Uh, at the same time, yeah, we have sustainable aviation fuels, which are probably the one of the best solutions, which can be implemented very quickly if there is if the production can be scaled, and if other challenges can be overcome. But it's much more challenging on the airline side, definitely, and or on the aircraft producer side. So now you're in the renewable energy industry, let's say, and you are very, as far as I understand, also from what you are communicating on LinkedIn, you are very passionate about various kinds of photovoltaic projects. So where, from your perspective, is the biggest value in those projects, and potentially where can be the link with for the airport? So as you said, should every airport have its own photovoltaic plant?
To some extent, actually, I would say yes. Um, it is often raised whether it will cause glare or glimpse, and this will make pilots unable to land. But you're right, as you are aware of navigation systems, it is actually not really the visual impact, but more how the navigation systems are maybe interfering with the steel structures and all sorts of other impacts. So this has to be investigated. It's not like yes or no. As many things in aviation, you have to go through an investigation. Actually, even how, for example, firefighters can get access to the runway through the solar farm. These are more the questions locally should be investigated, but there are hundreds of examples in the United States. Actually, in the US, there is a form at the FAA. If you as an airport operator want to apply for a solar plant, you fill this form and you submit as another infrastructure at your airport. So it is a very standard procedure. But why I was really impressed by the scale, how solar is taking place in Hungary during that airport project, it was how this technology is available today and gives a solution for a problem which is here with us today. So basically, no matter if you are a company producing soft drinks or you are a logistic company or an airport, very sure that you use electricity. And this electricity, unless you are somewhere in Iceland, this electricity has a huge CO2 emission. And you can wait for your governments or your electricity network development plans for the next 20, 30 years or net zero of your country, or you can do your own. Again, if you look at your own home, going back to the mortgage question, I can just sit back and wait until my network in Hungary will become carbon neutral, or I can go and set up my own solar panels, maybe battery, and doing my net zero at home. So this was the reason I decided taking care of these projects, and actually this is really happening, and that makes me busy these days.
Great. So just out of curiosity, I'm not really I don't have a lot of information in this area. So why in Iceland the energy or the electricity production is not really emitting those emissions?
They use geothermal power production.
Of course, yeah. Then it makes
so
sense.
that's an advantage.
Mm-hmm. But is one more quick question about photovoltaic. Is it also something like Scandinavian countries are investing in and exploring this area? As of course there is not so much daylight and also not so many sunny days as in Hungary, for example, and not even talking about Spain, Italy, and those southern countries.
Yes, they do invest, and for example, I'm working a lot in the UK and Ireland, and these are not the countries you would say
exactly.
solar is a good business.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking too much about weather, but yes, it's a different, let's say, yield that you can expect. But on the other hand, the prices of these panels are continuously falling. So if I can give an advice, either as a homeowner or an airport operator, if you ever came across a solar project and you put into your desk because it was too expensive, go back to the vendor and ask for a quotation again, because prices are falling. Right, these days there might be some supply chain issues, but in general, prices are much more, let's say, pocket friendly. So this is something can be revised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely great advice for, as you are saying, not just for the airport operators, but for everybody, for all the owners. Let's talk a little bit widely. So you are in the renewable energy area. Um, if we take a look on this whole transition to the greener economy, from your perspective, what the governments should focus on in terms of making the whole economy is greener. Of course, there are probably several areas which should be taken into consideration. But from your perspective, what should be the main focus if you want to help this planet not to
Mhm.
heat up so
You
much?
know, it is very interesting, and since it is an aviation podcast, please allow me to bring an aviation example, which recently I was just thinking about. When you turn on your lights, for example, at your home, or you plan your processes at a company, you take electricity for granted, right? And because the electrification is taking place in Europe, and more houses will be heated or cooled by heat pumps, not gas. So more electricity will be used. More and more vehicles will be fueled by electricity, not conventional fuels. So more electricity will be needed. And we cannot build that many more solar and wind. You have to make a kind of balancing, and you as a consumer should also make your decisions. I was thinking maybe back those days when, for example, you had a Malay flight or a Lufthansa flight with a ticket price between Budapest and Berlin, uh, let's say 120 euros. And that was the ticket price. And you as a consumer knew, no matter it's Monday or Saturday, that was the price for the ticket. Many of the listeners are young enough that they cannot imagine that there was a time when the price of the ticket was based on the destination and nothing else. Like your electricity price today, you get your bill and it is paid by your kilowatt hour consumed. How about if there will be times in the day, just like when you fly on Saturday morning, when the price is cheaper, and there will be peak periods when the price for electricity will be higher. And you will have, as a consumer, the choice if I am cautious to turn on my washing machine later in the evening or early in the morning, let's say, um, just because it will be more affordable. Just like an air ticket, I make uncomfortable decisions and taking 6 in the morning flight because I want to save 50 euros instead of flying 10 a.m., right? Why is not going to happen with electricity? This will going to happen. And this is what consumers, in the beginning, maybe environmentally conscious consumers or budget conscious consumers will take. But I really think that this is one way forward, what every person can do in order to have a more clean and a sustainable power network. And I was just talking about power. This is what makes me busy these days. And there are so many other issues on circular economy and I don't know, eating less meat and other issues. These are the ones I'm not involved on a daily basis. But for power, this is how I see.
Yeah, and also definitely power plants are probably the largest producer of emissions. So definitely that's one of the areas where the focus should be. Um, Thanks a lot, Ferenc. Really appreciate your time. I think I will be more than happy if we can talk in the future and go into a little bit more detail on, because there is so much to talk about sustainability and also renewable energy and how those those topics can be transferred into the aviation world. But the last thing, I'm very curious about your opinion, and before we say goodbye, and obviously you know much more about this than I do, and I know it's not a one sentence answer for this very complicated question, but what is your view on the hydrogen versus electric battle in the aviation world, in the replacing the conventional fuels and going further for, I don't know, next 15, 20, 30 years? Will we have more hydrogen planes or electric planes?
You know, this, I think if we look at, for example, what happened with solar panels, as we discussed, solar was very popular, or maybe not popular, but highly deployed in countries where you would not expect, like in Germany. It's not really the sunniest part of Europe, but the highest penetration was in the beginning, with a good reason. Also, Spain has a good reason why solar is increasingly popular, or let's say Jordan or the United Emirates. So that's for solar. I see the same going to happen with hydrogen, that there will be hubs, for example, offshore wind, ports and harbors, and a good electricity or gas network in place. That will be an excellent location for hydrogen production. And if you can use it locally, for example, in harbors for fueling ships, that is going to happen sooner. And again, given the government incentives. The other hub, let's say, structure, when you have electricity producers, and nuclear will be certainly an area where, imagine if daytime all solar plants are producing, and maybe even your nuclear power plant has some remaining power. It's obvious that you want to produce hydrogen by this, and you want to use this hydrogen for something, transportation likely, or some industrial processes. It is again depending on the given governments and the ecosystem locally, if this will be used for fueling aircraft. But you have to also see that having hydrogen at one airport will be not enough, because you have to have, you know, another airport. So this will be, I think, it will take more time, and I expect more in the industry and the shipping sector first, before the aviation.
Okay, that was a long answer, but I see where you're coming from. So yeah, let's see what the next years and decades will bring in terms of hydrogen versus electric. And of course, in the meantime, as I mentioned, we have these sustainable aviation fuels, which is great technology, and I'm a big fan of that, because it can be implemented actually right now without necessity to change the airport infrastructure, for example, and the aircraft infrastructure as well, because it can be used on the existing engines, existing infrastructure. So I think in the meantime, there will be more and more investments and focus coming on in this area. So very last questions. What is your take on sustainable aviation fuels, if you follow this topic, at least from the side view?
If for the hydrogen you find that my answer was too long, with sustainable aviation fuel will be even longer. So keep it for the next interview.
Great idea. All right, Ferenc. Thanks a lot for talking to us today. All the best. Take care, and we'll speak, I'm sure, soon in the future.